This is the Hagmann and Hagmann Report for today. It is Friday, March 14th, 2014. I'm Doug Hagmann, co-host of my son, Joe Hagmann. Together, we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Folks, you're about to hear a great 3 hours worth of radio, 3 hours of unbiased and uncensored news, information, and analysis. This is stuff, folks, you really need to know, and I want to thank you for deliberately tuning into our show, and thank you so much for listening. For the new listeners, we broadcast live each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Our home base is on the internet at homelandsecurityus.com. We're also simulcast by the Christians United Broadcasting Network. There, tune us in at the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com. Thanks for joining us tonight, folks. Thank you for your belief and your trust in us, your continued belief and trust in us as we walk through this minefield of current events together, and such as it is. Facing World War III, facing challenges every single day. Just an announcement. Let me clear the air a little bit here. Well, first of all, Joe, let's jump on here.
I am here.
I know you are.
Glad to be here. It's Friday. Warmed up today in the Northeast. Much nicer day than it's been in the past few days.
We're supposed to get another 3 inches of snow tonight.
Are you being serious?
Yeah. It gets up to 45 degrees, and all of a sudden it turns ugly.
It was 55 actually.
What was it? It was incredible. But yeah, we're supposed to get another blast of winter, and then I don't know, sometime maybe in June or July it'll clear up here in the Northeast. But anyway, yeah, exactly. And tomorrow night I'll be on Coast to Coast AM for the first hour. That's Coast to Coast AM tomorrow night, Saturday night.
Did you ever find out who's co-hosting?
I did. My notes are in my office, and I can't get to them right now.
Not familiar, but not somebody you recognize? Or are you keeping a secret, which is...
well, I'll just say I'm keeping a secret. How's that? No, actually, I was told, and you know what? I don't believe I've ever been interviewed by this gentleman before, so I can't think of the name right off the top of my head. But I do want to just make if I can, just clarify a couple of things. And I know you listeners are familiar with what's been going on here, at least in my household and in my extended family. My mother-in-law has been sick. Just to give you a thumbnail idea of what happened here. She had 79 years old. She had taken a pretty bad fall in her living room. She had osteoporosis real bad, and she had taken a fall in her living room, fractured, not bad, but enough to really create some havoc. And for the last several months, she's been complaining of back pain and pain all over, and I don't know, sometime it was probably, my goodness, time just flies. It's a couple of weeks ago. We put her into rehab, and after having multiple doctors look at her and tests and what have you, she finally went into a nursing home setting. It was not a nursing home, but a rehab, a live-in rehab kind of thing. It's attached to a nursing home. Anyway, she just wasn't getting any better. And finally, we had done everything. My wife and I had done. My wife really led the charge and doing everything we could to get some sort of relief for her. And this past Monday. I'm sorry. On I think it was Sunday, she was admitted to the hospital. Once and for all. We demanded that something be done because her health was just declining incredibly, and it was a very steep decline. Finally, on Sunday, they did apparently some tests which they hadn't done in the past. Not exactly sure how that happens. So Monday morning, I think it was Monday or Tuesday. No, it was Tuesday morning. The doctor had said that she had stage 4 cancer, and they gave her a couple of weeks to live. I'm sorry, it was 2 to 3 weeks to live. And I just
which was surprising about the cancer after lots of tests for the last year and a half or so, and to learn about that so late seemed odd to me.
Well, right.
From
right.
what I know.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, and especially after we had pushed for all sorts of tests and what have you. And yeah, and I see in the chat room, I know there's no minor fracture, back fracture at 79 years old. I get that. It's just relative to everything. You've got to understand, I've been up for the last 36 hours. And
I was going to say 7.
7 hours, right? Well, at any rate, so on Tuesday, the doctors came out and said, yeah, stage 4 cancer, she has 2 to 3 weeks to live. And but this time she was just not with it. I mean, not with it at all. We took her home on Wednesday. I think it was Wednesday or Thursday. What is today? Friday. Thursday. We took her home. Or Wednesday. One of the days. I don't know. Make a long story short, she passed away this morning at 11 o'clock this morning after a couple of rough nights. Actually, it was Wednesday we took her home. So I just want to just thank everyone for your concern and for your consideration and for everything. And if you've wondered why this is my mother-in-law, to Tim. So if you're wondering why, for example, our website hasn't been updated and we've been a little bit behind the 8 ball with emails and such, that's the reason. Joe?
Yeah, I'm going to jump right into news. This story is a headline in a Drudge right now. And my father and I read it before the show and talked about it a little bit. U.S. aims to give up control over Internet administration. The U.S. officials announced plans Friday to relinquish federal government control over the administration of the Internet, a move that pleased international critics but alarmed some business leaders and others who rely on the smooth functioning of the web. Pressure to let go of the final vestiges of U.S. authority over the system of the web address and domain names that organize the Internet has been building for more than a decade and was supercharged by the backlash to revelations about National Security Agency surveillance last year. The looming change, if successfully executed, would end the long-running contract between the U.S. Commerce Department and the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, a California-based nonprofit group that goes by the acronym ICANN, or ICANN.
That's the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, by the way, just so you know.
And this contract was set to expire next year, but could be extended if the transition plan is not complete. And the announcement set off a passionate response, with some groups quickly embracing the change and others blasting it. Senator John D. Rockefeller, chairman of the Commerce Community, called the move in a statement consistent with other efforts the U.S. and our allies are making to promote a free and open Internet and preserve and advance the current multi-stakeholder model of global Internet governance. That from none other than John D. Rockefeller. But former House Speaker Newt Gingrich tweeted, "What is the global Internet community that Obama wants to turn the Internet over to? The risk foreign dictatorships defeating the Internet." And the article goes on from there.
This is, folks, this is something that we have to really watch. Essentially what we're seeing here is the United Nations seizing control over the Internet. And, you know, it's kind of funny because IBD ran an editorial business, Daily ran an editorial back in November 2012 talking about the UN plans for control over our technology, over free speech and intellectual freedom. And remember, folks, they were talking about a global tax in the name of fairness. Think of net neutrality on steroids. Remember all the arguments we had with NAFTA, or not NAFTA, but SOPA, PIPA, ACTA, all of those, and how we were being pushed into this, well, this incredible role of taking a back seat with respect to the Internet. Well, this is exactly what's happening right now. The European Commission, I mean, they want to end control over our governance of the Internet. Who built the Internet? Who you know, what country, though? You know, it's amazing to me to see that we are losing, or not losing, but giving up control, power, the shaping of the internet, and turning this over to this international community. And how has that worked for anything over the past number of decades? It hasn't. It's not. And folks, understand this. We are going to be entering into an age where the internet is going to be used by corporations, and it's going to be censored, and you're not going to get the news, and the news that the new media.
Yeah.
They've got to take the control out of our hands, at least the control that we seem to have at this point.
Look what they did to the TV network and how they turned it into a monopoly. You know, if you're just an average, hardworking citizen, you cannot go and buy a TV station or channel and play it and get it, played around the different TV networks, whether it be DirecTV, Time Warner, internationally, satellite. It's not that simple. And we were talking about this before the show. What would this mean to alternative news media, whether it be print or sites like Blog Talk Radio or individual sites like our site, HomelandSecurityUS.com. Say we were to do a show just from there. You know how Pastor Paul Begley does his show. He streams it. He uses Blog Talk. He uses live stream right from his own website. Would be the, I guess you'd say, the end result. How would this change, if it would change, our ability to do what we do now?
Well, aside from a revenue generating, the domain name, you've got to look at this in a couple of different ways. Domain names, the .com, the whatever, the revenue generated there, where does it go? Did you ever think about that? I mean, this is a revenue.
Went to GoDaddy Super Bowl commercials.
Exactly. Well, folks, I would urge you to research this, because what we're looking at here is a larger picture instead of some of the more little bits and pieces of this. But the bottom line is the internet is going to cease to exist as we know it. Oh, it'll still be there, but it won't appear as we have known it and grown with it. Obviously, the internet, crack internet for the masses that have these online games, that's still going to function. Those entertainment sites are going to function. You're going to be able to get your entertainment news over this.
I heard on Bloomberg Radio, they were talking about Netflix and how Netflix was going back and forth with the internet service provider over bandwidth and the amount they pay. Well, during this talk on Bloomberg, they stated that Netflix traffic is 31% of the internet at any given time, of the internet traffic or bandwidth being used.
And what's the rest? Porn?
They didn't break it down further than that. They were talking specifically about these online movie companies, Netflix being the most popular. And we compare that to what, we'll just say the whole network of Blog Talk would take up. But regardless, the relinquishing of power over the internet to the international body does many things. One, we are no longer on the internet going to be under any kind of constitutional law, would we? We'd be under some sort of international treaty or international law.
Well, okay, first of all, I just want to, I suppose we should get into this a little bit more. It was announced today, of course, that the U.S. government would surrender all control over the internet, at least the administration of the internet. Now, the Washington Post points out today that it's who's going to take control over it? Well, certainly not the United Nations. Okay, that's the Washington Post today, and
also saying, this isn't giving the internet power or giving the internet over to the United Nations either.
Well,
and this article has changed since we first read it. It's
I should point out, and you should. Thank you for pointing that out. It's morphed into. It's changed. The text has changed. The complexion has changed. Now, Adam Clark Estes from Gizmodo had written this expose about this very thing. By its very definition, the Internet is a free and open global communications network, or at least that's what it's supposed to be. The Internet, of course, grew out of a Defense Department project back in the 60s called ARPANET through the network, though the network was really built by many scientists from around the country and even around the world. But for a complicated set of reasons, states Adam Clark Estes, the U.S. government maintains some level of administrative control over certain parts of how the Internet works, specifically through a long-running contract between the Commerce Department and ICANN, the naming number part of the Internet. The ICANN, they control the assigning of Internet domain names, like, as I said, like .com and .org and what have you. And according to Adam Clark Estes, he says, well, the news is really not a surprise. As you might have noticed, the government's been taking a lot of flack for spying on everyone, or seemingly everyone in the entire world, and compromising that free and open market principle pretty hard. Well, NSA shenanigans aside, the Internet really is a tool for the entire world. So this Adam Clark Estes appears to be on the stage saying, look, it's possible that a new international organization will be created to take over the U.S. government responsibilities, which might be a good thing, but it's too soon to tell. But any time you get government involved in this type of operation, it doesn't have good results. You're going to find people arguing on both sides of this, and really multiple sides of this,
with no conclusion until we see one arm of the enforcement branch take effect. And exactly. Possibly by that time, where are you going to complain to? Well, and the question also, anonymous. Maybe how they've been going after anonymous posters on the Internet. Maybe it won't be so anonymous anymore if it is under some international control. And the third question, or third statement, domain names. We see that this ICANN, or ICANN, is a seller of domain names and numbers associated with Internet websites. Would there be a new? I guess the question is, could our site, would we have to rebid to get that same domain? Would there be some kind of reset, or would there be the rules stay the same for people who already own domain names? And that's a question I have that's not made clear in this article.
I see this having an impact pretty much more in 18 months, 18 to 24 months, and when everything seems to be looking. You'll look down the road in 18 to 24 months, perhaps this is when things are going to be taking place in a lot of areas. Well, I want to tell you. Oh, go ahead. I
mean, this transition happens from the U.S. control to international control. We'll say after the transition is complete and the United States no longer has a control over the functions it did on the Internet, we have an international incident, whether it be a Fukushima incident, whether it be a start of a World War III type incident, or another country invasion. Censorship. Are we looking at something where it would be controlled content would be what is distributed?
Ultimately, and we know this, ultimately they want to criminalize free speech, or certain aspects of free speech. They want to criminalize any type of, if you're disputing with the government's official line, if you're criticizing the government, they want to criminalize that. If you're a Christian, they want to criminalize that. If you were talking about anything about Christianity, they're going to criminalize that. If you're talking against gay marriage or homosexual marriage, if you're talking against abortion, they're going to criminalize that for hate speech, or put you in a category of hate speech. Look at what Facebook's doing. Look at what these social networking sites are doing. They're actually going after people who dare broach certain subjects. Remember, 2 years ago, something happened to me 2 years ago, a year and a half ago now, going on 2 years, where our website was hosted via GoDaddy.
Yes, I remember.
And GoDaddy.
It was on the wedding. Wedding day.
GoDaddy sent me a notice and said, you know what, you've got 48 hours to get off our servers. 48 hours. Really. Yeah, did you ever try moving a website? Well, it might have been 72. I'm not sure. It was 48 or 72 hours. Try moving a website in 48 or 72 hours and asking why. The reason was, well, we don't, you're not a good fit with GoDaddy. Now, GoDaddy, everyone says, oh, man, well, the owner of GoDaddy, he's a conservative. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Definitely something to I mean, I didn't want to, I'm not trying to drag this out, and I knew a lot of the questions I asked you did not have specific answers to, but trying to get a basic idea or an understanding of what this really means to the internet here in America. But
I think we're just going to have to wait and see.
I agree.
It's not going to be good, though. I'm going to tell you right now, it's not going to be good.
Not going to be good as we've been talking of the U.S. economy and the way this is headed, and the world reserve currency being the dollar and the status of that, how that is being challenged. Well, today, Russia withdraws, billions of dollars from the Federal Reserve?
This is an attack against the U.S. dollar. We told you this right from the beginning. This is a NATO operation in Ukraine. NATO meaning the United States, Great Britain, France, and other countries under the NATO flag. Turkey accepted, of course. They are going back to the Russian, to Russia, and we're losing Turkey as an ally. So what's taking? Go ahead.
According to the Wall Street Journal, it says foreign central banks' treasury bond holdings parked at the Federal Reserve dropped by the most on record in the latest week. Some analysts think that the crisis in Ukraine is sparking the move. In theory, Russia is shifting its treasury bond holdings out of the Fed and into offshore accounts.
So what have we been telling you? What have we been telling you? This is all about the U.S. dollar, about taking down the U.S. dollar. At the end of the day, you can go through all the details. You
talked about this, how you and our intelligence insider, we talked about this on a show, and he gave some great information, as well as you did, about the history of the collapse of the USSR and by what mechanisms we used to help that process along. And it was an economic process that worked heavily against the former Soviet Union that helped collapse that country. This is what we're seeing here.
Right, and it's coming back against us in spades. Okay, Chris Matthews, I said in spades. You got a problem with that? Anyway, this what we're seeing right here, and if you look even closer, George Soros, of all people, who else is involved in Ukraine's turmoil aside from the West and of course, our intelligence assets, as well as the Illuminist, the satanic influence on both sides. George Soros. Yeah,
did you see that latest piece on the globalist footprint that's in the middle of Ukraine?
Right. And is anyone surprised by this? Is there any, in recent times, has there been any currency that hasn't been taken down or affected by the fingerprints, the grubby, palmy, sweaty fingerprints of this war criminal, in my view, George Soros? I mean, look, he's a billionaire. He is up to his eyeballs in what's going on in the Ukraine. His operations in other nations over the past, 30 years.
And I want to find the verse in the Bible, but I believe it's in Isaiah where it talks about, where the Lord is addressing the robbers of the poor, and I'm paraphrasing here. I have to find the verse and chapter, but it's woe unto you who use your liberalism as a form of oppression, monetary oppression against the poor who are already poor. And as I said, I'm paraphrasing. Those are definitely not the exact words, but it is something very similar to that. And this is what we're seeing through these globalists who have control of not only humongous, bank accounts of their own money, they control the nations and the mechanisms by which the nation's currencies are created and issued. And with that kind of power,
yes,
comes destruction at their will.
Well, the key sentences here, the key phrases when you talk about, I don't even want to get into the adjectives. I don't need to. George Soros, when you talk about him, his utterances include democratic transformation of Ukraine. And, of course, we get into the international. Well, even before that, I'll just say this. Many of the protesters that were engaged in active demonstrations for protests in Ukraine were funded, were paid. They were paid to do this. Of course, paid by intelligence agencies from the West, whether it be Israel, United States, United Kingdom. Yeah, I'm not going to give Israel a pass on this, nor am I going to give the U.S. a pass on this, or Great Britain a pass on this. They're all up to their necks in this, the evildoers behind the criminal element. That's right. But Soros, here he comes, this billionaire. He's got more money than he could ever spend, made on the backs of the British people and many nations across the world. I mean, he's probably been responsible, at least in my estimation, for more people dying than perhaps even Hitler, or is rivaling Hitler in terms of the death that he has caused and disruption of life. And here he's deified by these progressives, these despicable progressives. But the Soros-funded NGOs were trained the demonstrators.
The NGOs, like the Constitution Society.
Yeah. International Renaissance Foundation being one, the Open Society Institute. The IRF, the International Renaissance Foundation, was founded and is funded by Soros. They're bragging that they've given more than any other donor organization to the democratic transformation, there's that phrase again, of Ukraine. The IRF, their annual report for 2012 states that they provided $63 million in funding to civil society organizations, more than any other donor organizations working in this field in Ukraine. Now, if you think about this, and if you look at this, well, in fact, New American, William Jasper writes that the U.S. in Ukraine's currency, the U.S. or the Ukraine dollar is worth about 11 cents U.S. You've got to get into this article, and you've got to get into the Soros angle of this, because it's just not intelligence. And I do believe, based on everything I've heard, that Soros and Western intelligence are working together. And Soros, and of course you've got Soros, Reed, Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, especially Bill Clinton,
Jared,
Obama, Jerry. All these people are they're all working together.
Napolitano. No, I know she's gone, but she has to be in the shadows somewhere.
Well, and I think at some point there was a level of collusion with Napolitano. But
I found that verse in Isaiah.
Go ahead.
In Isaiah 32, verse 5, it says, well, we'll start at verse 4. The heart also of the rash shall understand knowledge. The tongue of the stammerers shall be ready to speak plainly. The vile person shall no more be called liberal, nor the churl be said to be bountiful. Now, the churl is a root word meaning of withholding. For the vile person will speak villainy, and in his heart it will work iniquity, to practice hypocrisy, and to utter error against the Lord, to make empty the soul of the hungry. He will cause the drink of the thirsty to fail. The instruments of the churl are evil. He deviseth wicked devices to destroy the poor with lying words, even when the needy speaketh right. But the liberal deviseth liberal things, and by liberal things he shall stand. And it goes on.
There you have it. That's a perfect passage for this.
And the word liberal breaks down to generous or willing, but not always meaning willing of God.
Right. Having a different agenda than the stated positive, good agenda. It's interesting because Ukraine is really between a rock and a hard place, folks. Here's what's going to have to happen. They're either going to go with with Russia, with Putin, and of course that's KGB. You're looking at a crony capitalistic Russian type of market, or go to the EU. And the EU, what's there? Well, of course, you've got the entirety of the IMF, I suppose. That's an accurate statement. And the Ukrainian people are going to be burdened, like the United States, with debt that they can't possibly pay off. So it's a bankers. This whole thing stems from the bankers. But even beyond that, like we said yesterday, you can't separate this from Syria, nor should you, because this is a NATO-led intelligence operation against Putin to open up another front, that being Ukraine. Putin's going to respond in kind. And by the way, if you don't think nuclear war is possible over this or Syria, you're sadly mistaken. People just don't want to it's fear-mongering to even consider nuclear war. Well, okay, fine. Then don't look at the facts. Don't listen to what Obama is saying. Don't listen to what Kerry's saying, and certainly don't listen to what Putin's saying. I mean, it's not fear-mongering. It's just stating where they're coming from. And they're saying, look, Putin's saying, I'm not going to put up with this. And Obama's saying, well, Kerry, you got until Monday to do this, this, and this. Well, these are untenable choices for Putin. Certainly not going to be well received. So what's going to happen on Monday when Putin gives Kerry the proverbial finger? And I mean that. I mean, you think Putin is going to say, oh, well, gee, given the fact that you're upset, John Kerry and Mr. Obama, we're going to change our attitude, of course, or change our position. No, it's posturing to the brink of insanity. Now, we know that all of this is controlled at higher levels. What we're seeing here is the stage performance by the people in power, the people that are pulling the strings. But if you give the puppets the ability to push buttons and the ability to play with some pretty nasty toys, if that's what you give these puppets and watch and direct the puppets to, well, what do you think is going to happen? Don't forget the agenda of population control. And as we told you I think it was the day before this week, as we've been saying this week, look at Syria. There's 200,000 people dead. I'm talking about middle-class, average people dead in Syria. We tend to think, too, when we're talking about this kind of stuff, that everyone outside of the United States or Canada or the UK, if we're talking about people in Syria, they're living in these mud stone huts, No, we're talking about places, urban areas. We're talking about urban settings. We're talking about places that, they've got Starbucks, perhaps they've got another type of coffee house. But you're talking about a westernized civilization. Look at the people look at the refugees who are getting out of Syria with just the clothes on their back. These aren't street people, as I've said before. These are well-dressed people. These are people, on average, that would come from any subdivision here in the United States. And they're being uprooted by the millions out of Syria. So, too, is it with the dead. You got 200,000 dead. And Gajendra Singh, I reference his analysis of the Middle East conflict of Syria. Syria will not, when Assad is successfully overthrown, and he will be, because that's part of the plan for this New World Order, and he will be, Syria is going to explode outward, and 20% of the population will be victimized, will be dead. That's 20% of
33rd year anniversary of what? This March 20th, I believe?
Give me the year. I'm a little
I'll just tell you the answer. It's the Georgia Guidestones.
Oh, okay.
Which talks about maintaining humanity under a population of 500 million in perpetual balance with nature.
What number is the year?
33rd anniversary. And some people have put some significance on that.
I would. Wouldn't you? What about we know that the elite or the globalists, they use numbers, they use this sacred numerology or numerology and sacred geometry to send signals among themselves. And of course, we can't talk like that because obviously that's outside of the normal realm of thought process. So that's just conspiracy nonsense.
And we also talked about how in philosophy it defines, art as a form of communication through symbols dating back from ancient times all the way till now, communicating through signals we would have no idea understanding. And sometimes it could be in your face with certain numbers. I mean, just look at and God will always show his fingerprint on something, whether we understand it or not. And an example of that is I was watching a short movie talking about when the United States inserts itself in trying to separate Israeli land from the people.
Well, this is kind of another focal point, and perhaps the main focal point of what everything else is all about. So go ahead.
Talked about George Bush and his administration issuing the Marshall Plan, and certain dates when the Marshall Plan was first delivered to Israel. There was a tropical storm, I believe it was called Allison, that swept over Texas, dumping 28 inches of rain over Houston, causing over $4 billion in damage. Then there was when Ariel Sharon took 9,000 plus Israeli settlements, or people out of settlements, over 21 settlements, out of Israel.
That was Gush Katif.
Katrina came.
Yep.
Then Bush tried to reinsert himself in the talks toward the end of his administration, and we had the stock market crash with the stock market, or Dow Jones, going down how many points? 777? You're muted.
Oh, yeah, I was. Okay.
Then they talked about Obama bringing it up again, and not short after that, we had the BP oil disaster. Now, when we look at all those...
I'm muted again, right? It's all coincidence.
Well, after whatever they're doing now, I suggest... after watching that video today, it put a lot of... I already understood these things to be true, and thinking about it, I guess it was in the back of my mind, but thinking about it, well, with all these talks about dividing Israel again and implementing a two-state solution, how come we have not seen a harsh form of judgment yet, as some of those examples are? Well, what if they get further than they ever have before? What if they do succeed in implementing a two-state solution? Will the United States end up being two bodies, separate from each other? Will it be divided?
Or will we be balkanized like it's intended? And I do believe that through the, if you go back to 1965 immigration, if you go back to the Clinton administration, what they did with illegal immigration, and one can argue, well, Clinton did more for illegal immigration in terms of fighting it than any other president. Well, that's not exactly true. Although it was during his administration where a lot more was done against the illegal immigration population, that's kind of a collateral effect. And that's true under his administration. However, even today, look at what's going on today. It's catch and release with respect to illegal immigration. It's lack of enforcement. And in fact, they're a protected class now, these illegal immigrants. And you've got both sides on this, the left and the right, the Republicans and Democrats. And we have told you so many times, it doesn't matter. Republicans and Democrats, it does not matter. So we have to, once again, we've got to look at this, the entire world stage, as one, or even a series of stages, interconnected stages. We cannot look at Ukraine without looking at Syria, without looking at Israel, without looking at Libya, without looking at Benghazi, without looking at what's going on in America. And that's what people are doing right now. And even a lot of the new media, the people in the new media, this is what they're doing right now. Is they're taking, for example, just taking Ukraine and Crimea and saying, and just putting a focus on that, not seeing the relationship between Ukraine and Crimea with Syria, and Syria with Libya, and so on and so forth. This is all part of the larger plan, and until we see that, then we're not going to really understand what's going on. And I know people are saying, well, geez, you ever going to shut up about this? Sometimes I get tired of talking about it. But I really believe that what these psychopaths and sociopaths, by very definition, are bringing the world to the brink of war. And if not a full-blown nuclear war via proxy, or even ultimately directly, but more likely be a proxy, meaning that you're not going to see the U.S. and Russia go at it head to head. You will see the proxy states fighting amongst themselves, but the real powers behind the proxies are, of course, the West and the United States and Russia, for example. But who's funding? Our intelligence insider, W. Very, very good analysis when we were talking about the Super Bowl. We were talking about the symbolism of the Super Bowl, but more importantly, we were talking about the Super Bowl itself. And he asked me a question. I think he even asked it on air or said it on air. Who won the Super Bowl? Who won the Super Bowl? Everyone should know this.
I don't remember.
The owners.
Oh, I thought you meant the team.
The owners.
I can't even remember who played.
Oh, the owners.
Denver.
See,
the Denver one?
No, it was Seattle. The owners won. It wasn't a team. The team was just present for the entertainment of the masses. Pull yourself away, folks, and look at, instead of watching, we'll say, the television set, pull yourself back a few steps and look at who's watching the TV. It's like
my favorite shows are on.
Yeah, I know. It's Gilligan's Island, 1965. It's on right now. I
watch TV from midnight till 7 p.m. Then we do the show. I'm kidding.
I almost believe that sometimes.
Some people really do that. You see today, when I was in school, I'd come home from school, and whether it was my dad or my mom, if I couldn't escape or hide from them, it was homework first, no matter what. Today, kids are lucky to even have parents there to let them sit down and watch TV, or to say, yeah, sit down and watch TV. From generation to generation, it's gotten worse and worse, the discipline of kids, and we've seen, because of that, the rebellion of children. Maybe the rebellion of children, and I do believe it is a sign. It's spoken about biblically as being a sign of the end, when children will hate their parents. But did it have to happen the way it did? As Paul McGuire says, not to have a fatalistic attitude. Well, could this be something that can be turned around through, or are we too far gone as a people?
It doesn't matter. We shouldn't have a fatalistic attitude, but not for the reasons I think what you're trying to express, Joe. I think that we shouldn't have a fatalistic attitude because we're operating already from a position of victory. We know who's going to win. And
I want to say this. I know you didn't see this. Somebody in the chat room said the name Lady Gaga. I didn't watch the video. Apparently there was a performance that this thing gave where she was vomited on willingly in her video, just some nasty. And this is stuff that's they call entertainment today.
Yeah, folks, you should.
Even the worst people that I used to listen to in the music industry or whatever, never. They used foul language. That was the worst of it. That
was the worst that you saw.
Right. And these people today, openly have demons in their videos, evil symbolism. There's no end to the wickedness in Hollywood and in the music industry today.
Well,
and it's acceptable. It's a social norm now.
This is bringing us down, folks. I really didn't want to get really down in the dumps tonight, or bring anyone else down in the dumps, because that's not what it's all about. It's just a picture of reality. Like you said, we've had for decades, for a long, since the beginning of man, we've had pornography in different forms. Prostitution, of course, is tongue-in-cheek, the world's oldest profession. And I suppose they're right. But we've had this decadence that has embraced our culture and our society, but never has it been so prevalent than today. And even today, it's gotten exponentially worse. I remember back in the 1970s, I happened, and this is a true story. I went with some people, with some friends. If you remember the decade of the 70s, of course, if you lived it, it was a pretty nasty decade. And I had gone to it was a drive-in movie, and half the kids don't even know today what a drive-in movie was, but I remember a second feature, or a first. In fact, I don't even remember if we even went to the first one, but the second one And I was very young, or young enough. I shouldn't say very young, but young. And it was the most grotesque porn movie in fact, we left because it involved some of the most hideous. I don't even want to get into it, but you're talking about somebody throwing up on Lady Gaga, or allowing herself to be subjected to vomit, I suppose. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, that's what you're saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, just think of worse, okay? And that was back in the 70s, but now it's become more
mainland.
It's all. Whereas now they are looking at this as not they, meaning the progressives who are in charge, are looking at this as a protected art form. You can have bodies laying out in the nude in some public art gallery, and well, that's art. Or you can have a crucifix and urine. That's art, and you can't touch that. But don't you dare! Don't you even think about criticizing Islam. Don't you even think about criticizing the homosexual lifestyle, or don't even think about going off on the abortion crowd, anti-abortion crowd, or abortion crowd. I'm sorry.
See what was happening in Alabama with the police chief. Alabama police chief under fire from atheist activist group for using prayer walks to fight crime. And Alabama police chief is under fire from a prominent atheist activist organization for conducting prayer walks in his city as a way to fight crime. Probably the only real effective crime prevention tool, I would say, is prayer.
Let me guess. He's Caucasian. He's a white male, right? And he's
according to this picture. If this picture is the pastor, he's African American. Okay. Or this police chief, he's African American.
Okay. Well, it
not
just
sure if this is a picture of him, but I'll clarify this.
One could say, well, gee, Doug, now you're bringing race into it where race doesn't belong. Well, we're seeing a pattern here, aren't we? We're seeing,
yes, with the Justice Department and law enforcement, yes, there is racism from the side of Eric Holder and his administration that has been, it's not conjecture or it's not opinion, it is provable.
I mean, some of the biggest racists are blacks, or I'll just leave it at that. And I know plenty of black people who don't like that either.
It's on both sides just as bad. But we're seeing the outward manifestation of it coming from the other side more so than the hidden. And I don't know what's worse, to openly admit being racist or to hiddenly be hateful in your heart and pretending you're something else. I don't think there is a better of the two.
No, and folks, I do believe that I got, this week was just a bad week. I mean, I don't know. It's just been a bad week, folks, but where was I going with that? Because I was going somewhere really good with that. Okay, you're muted now. We
were talking about the Alabama pastor, or the Alabama police chief.
In the context of racism and what have you, I suppose, right? But it just appears that everything seems, and folks, I don't know. Maybe it's the weather, maybe it's a personal, situation, the darkness or whatever.
Regardless of the race, here's what the deal is. And
okay, explain this.
The police chief of Alabama is organizing prayer walks through the city as a way to fight crime, along with an ordained minister who's involved in the initiative Prayer Force United, a coalition between the chief, area churches, local residents, to host monthly prayer walks, faith-based gatherings in areas of Birmingham and other areas that are most affected by the crime. And it goes on to say, we understand that a police cruiser leads these prayer walks with lights flashing, following a truck with a sound system that cranks up some gospel music. This letter from the FFRE, which is the Madison, Wisconsin-based Freedom from Religion Foundation, outlined at the end a worship team is going full bore just praising Jesus. Then the local pastor introduces the police chief, and you then give a sermon invoking Jesus several times. The group stated in its correspondence to Roper that the organization finds a promotional video in the effort to be inappropriate, as it shows the chief stating that he is claiming the city of Birmingham for the kingdom of God and declaring that the largest problem in the city is a lack of godliness. As the chief, I consider myself the chief servant That's all just the servant of Almighty God, the servant of my King, King Jesus, a name that's higher than every other name, and at his name every knee will bow. Roper is also quoted as proclaiming at one prayer event, at the name, crime will bow. At the name, homicides are bowing. At the name, robbery and thefts and burglary are bowing because the name has all power. The Freedom from Religious Foundation contends that Roper's statements as being made in his official capacity are unlawful as they promote Christianity and religion over non-religion. Goes on to state, if you wish to participate in religious events, you must do so as a private citizen without using your office title and badge, the letter stated. Prayer Force United explicitly stated goals are all religious. Your official participation, therefore, is unconstitutional.
And therein lies the lie. Therein exists the lie. Because there is, when
Nobody's
we talk about... Well, not even that. The Constitution being, there is no separation of church and state in the Constitution. And speaking of Constitution, I do hope everyone got their constitutions today that we sent out.
Let me ask you this. If it was a Muslim imam organizing with the police chief doing prayer walks, would this Freedom from Religious Foundation feel the same way? And two, I mean, I don't see Muslims coming out and saying, how dare you?
Right.
I don't see, any other Buddhist, whatever the religion. It's the atheists. Now, the question is, if they were not invoking Jesus' name, if they were invoking another
Allah or
deity's name,
Muhammad, yeah.
Aside from the Holy Lord, would the contention still be there? Try it out. I don't know. If there's Muslim people who want peace out there, team up with your local police office chief and go do prayer meetings. We have the freedom to practice religion as long as we're not infringing on others' rights to do so. We don't have the freedom from religion. The First Amendment doesn't say you just have the freedom from hearing about other religions. It says you have the freedom to practice religion as you see fit. You're muted. It puts no limits on practicing religion. It puts limits on restriction of practicing your freedom of religion. Whether you're a pastor, whether you're a police officer, a politician, or a homeless man, it does not matter your title is in the United States, is your capacity as a law enforcement officer or a citizen.
I wrote up some notes for today. I was looking for them because we do, folks, it's so important that we understand that the Constitution, what we're talking about here, and this is where really ground zero is going to be with respect to the domestic aspect of how do I want to say this? When we're looking at, for example, warring or battling with respect to laws, the Constitution does not in any way, shape, or form prohibit if you look through the Constitution, and this is one of the reasons why we sent that we've had these Constitution booklets printed up, and we've sent them out, and we're sending them out still. There is nowhere in the Constitution at all where separation of church and state. It's a wall of deliberate deception.
And I have a book the size of an encyclopedia that goes through all the points of that. And about the Constitutions, I just want to say, Anna from Buffalo, I did get your text, and we will be responding to you about the Constitutions.
All right, but hopefully most people, because we did send out a whole bunch, and hopefully most of them got them today. And if not, and if you need, folks, if you're wondering what we're talking about, we had printed up pocket Constitutions. I mean, very small, about the size of maybe an iPhone, maybe a little bit wider. And all it is just merely the Constitution with the amendments and the Bill of Rights. And on the front cover is a picture of George Washington and our logo, and on the back cover is just about our radio program. It's not really, it's tasteful. It's not a big promo thing. But what's really important is it's between the two covers, and that's the Constitution of the United States. And we're just giving them out free, and we're trying to get them more printed, and then sending them out free. And this is all on us. But when we're dealing with such large numbers, and we are, I got to tell you, sometimes we can get behind. But anyway, so if you're interested in this, if you're interested in getting a couple of pocket constitutions, and if you put them to good use, in other words, when I was at the dentist's office, I left them about 10 on the desk. I asked him if I could leave them. He said, sure. Of course, that's after or before he dislocated my jaw. I'm not sure which, and I was spitting blood all day. But it's kind of the week I had, But if you can do that, or give them to your police agencies or your fire departments, or wherever you think they might, or better yet, city council, county council, whatever, have them read it. If not, you don't even have to. Again, it's the information about a radio show is not that prominent. What is prominent is the Constitution. So if they do decide to listen to our show, that's one thing. That's fine. But getting back to the separation of church and state, let me just address this before the top of the hour. And I think that this is so important to understand. It's one of the most insidious, perverse, yet effective weapons being used in the war against Christians and Christianity right here, right now. It's supposedly derived from our nation's founding document. It's likely that you've heard people speak about this or write about the separation of church and state, the wall of separation. Have you heard that? And they've always done it with authority. And maybe you have, too, in a discussion with your friends or family members and even ministers or priests or pastors. You've heard claims, well, the U.S. Constitution calls for a separation of church and state. Well, those citing such a mandated separation usually cite the First Amendment to reinforce their claims, but the fact of the matter is none of it's true. Now, you're probably talking with people who mean well, but are clueless about our national history. In other cases, you're going to find that the misconception is no misconception at all, but a deliberate deception. So it's important to understand that you are hearing or reading a lie, whether it's posted on the internet, in the newspaper, or spoken over the airwaves. For there's nothing in the Constitution, there's nothing in the Bill of Rights that mandates any doctrine of separation of church and state. The First Amendment to this Constitution, just to refresh and I know probably most of you can recite it verbatim, but it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of people to peaceably assemble and to petition government for a redress of grievances. The founders of our nation considered religious freedom, or the freedom to practice your faith, you listening to this, without fear or interference, get their grubby mitts and faces out of this. That was the intent of the Constitution. Stay the hell out of our religious business. End of story. And they consider this to be the most important part of this.
They can't stay out of anything. I mean, by nature.
Well, let me go on because I know we're getting close to the top here. But look, there's two parts to the First Amendment. The first part is the First Amendment. It's known as the Establishment Clause. The second part is the Free Exercise Clause. Now, it's extremely important that we understand the meaning and intent of both, because this amendment grants us, as Americans, the ability to freely and openly practice our faith, even if it means a police chief walking down the street professing his faith in whatever manner, way, shape, or form he's doing so. The basic fact of the matter is that this First Amendment was adopted by the framers to promote, not prohibit, but to promote religious freedom. The Establishment Clause was carefully crafted to prevent, you understand that? To prevent the federal government from establishing a national religion or a dominant religion that would cause Christians or followers of any other faith to be subjugated to a national religion. It was made clear through the writings of the framers. Following the ratification of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the Establishment Clause was never intended to be a tool to prevent us Christians from openly practicing our faith in any public venue. It was never intended to prevent the display of nativity scenes or the Ten Commandments or any other religious signs or icons on public property. No. It was written for the purpose of stating what the federal government is prohibited from doing, and they're prohibited from sticking their nosy faces and obtuse actions into our business. Get out of our business. Now, this is even made a lot clearer. If you take what George Washington said, and this is well cited, he said this: if I could entertain the slightest apprehension that the Constitution framed in the Convention, where I had the honor to preside, might possibly endanger the religious rights of any ecclesiastical society, certainly I would never have signed it. Or, he said, place my signature to it. Well, you got Washington, you got Madison, who was the primary architect of the Constitution. He said in a speech on July 12, 1788 to the Virginia Convention, he said this: there is not a shadow of a right in the federal government to intermeddle with religion. In other words, get out. But you know what? Despite the careful wording and the obvious intent of the framers of the Constitution, these anti-Christian activists, these progressive, slanderous, these progressive people who want to just stomp out Christianity have perverted, and they're using convoluted interpretations of our Constitution against us. The perversion of the Establishment Clause appear to begin, really, I believe, when you look at FDR. Because it was after World War II when the Supreme Court began to just take a left turn from the Christian heritage of America. And some will say, oh, America was never established as a Christian nation. You want to bet that we're going to get into more of that when we come back and more news.
How much you want to bet?
I'll bet you. How much money do I have in my pocket? I got $3. I was going to say I got two something, $2 and change. So we'll put it up.
And we have to decide from the point of what is God meaning from the framers versus what is God meaning from the citizens. I think that's something we would have to discuss if we got into that.
Well, we're going to briefly hit this, and we're going to tell you why this is really relevant to what's going on today, because there is a point to this. Yes, we did show prep today. There is a point to this, a very, very strong point to this, a very relevant point, because while we're looking at Ukraine, while we're looking at Syria, while we're looking at the Middle East, while we're looking at Obama posturing, making words, and then going off and playing golf, while we're looking down the barrel of a missile nuclear weapon, I'm going to tell you right now, there are things happening here which are eroding our ability, or our rights under the First Amendment and the Second Amendment. We have to address, and this is part and parcel to it, folks. You're listening to a very special, a very fabulous Friday edition of the Hagmann Report. I'm Doug Hagmann. With me is my co-host Joe Hagmann. Together, we are the Hagmann Report. Thanks for listening. Thank you for joining.
Gentlemen, to this Friday, March 14th edition of the Hagmann Report. Hour number 2 here. We're going to be hitting some news. Also want to give you a little bit of housekeeping information. Next Friday, we have scheduled to come on with us Augusto Perez, and he might be joined by Brother Marcus, but for sure, as of right now, Augusto Perez will be joining us next Friday at this time for the whole 3-hour shows. He has updates on some of the information he gave about the person who he spoke to in Puerto Rico about some type of space event and much more that he wants to share with our audience. And he sent us an email saying how he felt an urgency to contact us and to come on the show. He said the Holy Spirit has been moving him to reach out to us for some reason, and we decided to ask him to come on the show, and he wants to come on the show. And when he comes on, it is always fantastic, as the Holy Spirit is with that man, as well as Brother Marcus. And when they get together, they've been doing some shows together on Brother Marcus's show, Pine Ridge Warriors, which are Saturday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. That's Pine Ridge Warriors right here on Blog Talk Radio Saturday night. You can get their archives. He was actually on, Augusto was on with Brother Marcus this last Saturday, and Brother Marcus did a 2-part Saturday-Sunday show. Well, he's been doing those now for about a month, but this last one with Augusto Perez. So next Friday, and we do have some other guests lined up for next week, just not written in yet, but we will give those announcements as we get the confirmations. Also tonight, we have more news from the EPA, what they are doing.
Basically, more housekeeping. If I can just throw in one more thing, 2 more things. tomorrow night I'll be a guest on Coast to Coast during the first hour, not just the news segment, but the first hour. It's Saturday night, tomorrow night. The topics are going to range from Ukraine to Syria to domestic issues as well. If we can fit in all that information in 1 hour, that'd be great. Hopefully that'll be the case. Also on Monday, folks, I will not be here on Monday. So not that makes any difference, but I just thought I'd toss it out to you because of the current situation. And I just want to just bring that up again for the people joining us now for the second hour. For those on hitting the terrestrial stations who are joining us, just want to say thank you so much for your kind words and concern. Of course, our website has been not dark, but it has not been updated for a period of time, and the reason being is I was heavily involved in attempting to assist my wife in dealing with her stepmother, or her mother, not her my mother-in-law, who 79 years old, became ill in the course of the last I don't know, a couple of weeks. Her health declined rapidly, like I've never seen anyone decline rapidly, and we did everything we could to get the doctors to diagnose what was wrong with her, and they kept running tests and coming back with, hey, everything is fine. And it's interesting to me, ladies and gentlemen, because I see a lot of shades of universal health care aspects coming through here. Now, I'm not going to blame it on the universal health care. I'm not going to blame. There's no blame here that I can see. And I've gone through this over and over in my head. But the long and short of it is we had, because she had a fracture in her back, we had arranged for her to go to a rehab facility. And while she was in this rehab facility, she was physically declining. I mean, we could see this while nurses and doctors were looking at her and not seeing it. And it wasn't a case of it was just a very surreal experience. Well, all the tests are coming back positive. What tests you run, and on and on and on. And then, of course, the all-encompassing diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia, the onset of dementia. Well, they had her putting, round pegs and round holes and seeing if she could do it and asking questions about, how many people live in your house, and cognitive tests, but never getting to the real physical tests, at least not to the way we wanted them to be done. And at one point, I remember, this is now 3 weeks ago, and I'm pouring my heart out here. I mean, I'm telling you stuff that we went through during this time. I recall at one point in time sitting down with the doctor and saying, look, if it's a matter of the insurance not covering, I'll pay for the test, whatever the test is, to find out what's wrong with this woman. Well, we found out on, I think it was this past Tuesday morning, the doctor came in and said, oh, yeah, you know what, we did run this certain, we gave her a CT, and then we found that she's stage 4 cancer. Now, here's a woman who was vibrant 6 months ago.
Yeah, not even, I mean,
like you, I mean, walking around, shopping, laughing, doing whatever,
When I commented to my wife about this, who's not relatively close to your mother-in-law, she was surprised because remembering the last time she saw her, she was fine, appeared fine.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, she was my mother-in-law, so I would always joke with her about, well, it's my mother-in-law, you're my mother-in-law. Guys aren't supposed to, be close to mother-in-laws, right? Well, we had our own system of joking around. Yeah, I know, but we joked around a lot. But she lost that edge. She lost that. It was kind of a very sudden change. And again,
anybody who's taken care of an older relative and sat with them through the stages of the ends of their life understands how different parts of that person kind of leave and go away through the stages of dying.
Well, you know that from taking care of your grandmother.
Right. And what you're describing is kind of opposite. Well, my grandma had cognitive ability all the way till the end.
Right.
She lost her, more mobility, and really you could tell. I mean, the Lord prepares the spirit. I mean, the spirit knows before it goes. I'd say at least a week before it goes, because that's when family, when this started to get real serious, it was at least a week, 10 days before she passed away. That he said it's not going to be too long. And I knew when, what really clued me in when my grandmother was passing away, and my grandmother, she was a warrior. She faced death, 5, 6 different times over a period of years, and always came out on top. Even the time, I remember she was in the ICU, and the doctor said, "There's nothing we can do. We're going to pull this tube out." It was after 2 weeks of her not eating, and they said she might go right there. She lived like another year after that. But
and we were in Buffalo when we got the news. Yeah. I think working, and we ran back, and
she was fine after they took the tube out. Like she just got done, or she just woke up. But towards the very end there, the last week, I remember her. She'd have the TV on, and she was staring out the window. And that was, you can see it in their eyes a little bit at first, but I've never went through the other side where having somebody not responsive.
Right. And that was kind of the odd thing about this, and that's why I kind of look at what's coming to us, the healthcare debacle I see coming in, and even getting a little taste of it now, folks, with respect to how the doctors are kind of prepping, the administration, the hospitals are kind of prepping themselves for this change. And I'm not liking this too much, but at any rate, once again, the people joining us, long and short of it is on Tuesday, the doctor finally, after running tests, came out and told us, I think what we already suspected was that she had stage 4 cancer. We didn't suspect stage 4. We didn't suspect cancer. At least not in that aggressive form, because all the tests, the blood tests and such, came back normal, and it didn't click right away. How could that be? Well, what tests didn't you run, and wouldn't this show up in blood tests? Well, I'm not going to get into all of the diagnostics or any more of the laborious details, but on Tuesday, the doctor says, "I'm sorry, she's probably got 2 to 3 weeks to live." And we had left that meeting. I told my wife, I said, "Look, I get this really bad feeling just based on watching her that, it's not 2 to 3 weeks, but perhaps 2 to 3 days." So we brought her home, and it's from the day of her diagnosis to her death was 4 days, and it was so she passed away this morning at 11 o'clock, or it was 11:15. So for the last 48 hours, we've been just running just. Well, you know how it goes. I mean, anyone who's lived any length of time into adulthood has lost someone, so you understand how it goes. So the reason I mention this is not for woe was us or woe was me or anything. The reason I mention this is because and I've gotten emails saying, "What have you quit? Have you quit doing what you're doing? Have you quit writing? Have you?" And no, it's not that. It's just really such a consuming.
Only so many hours in a day.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
I'm telling you, with this family issue, this latest one, or most of them that are this serious in nature, this takes up 110% of your time outside of the show. And I can vouch for that all week with you and what you've been doing, except for the dentist.
Oh, yeah.
You found time to fit the dentist in there twice.
Yeah, and that's, you know what, folks? Oh, and let me share one more thing, and this is kind of a humorous thing. Men who try to cook, okay, for example, let's say you want to help your wife out. Given the situation today, I decided to cook for the family in the event that they wanted food, and I figured, okay, I can do this. I'm not a cook. Now, how bad can you screw up with a crock pot? Can you? Okay, you saw the crock pot in my home, Joe, the one with the. Okay, well, there was a one before that had a seal on it, and when I say crock pot, maybe it's like pressure cookers. It would be a more. I guess maybe it was a pressure cooker. I don't know. It looked like a crock pot to me, but it had those handles and a seal where you seal it up and you turn it on high and you put the stuff in like sauce and meatballs, and they've got it's a glass lid with a folks, I don't know if you know this, with a seal around it, and then you kind of put the snaps on the sides to kind of keep the lid down, especially when you're moving it around. Well, that's what I did. I put sauce and meatballs in there. How bad can I screw this up? And you turn it on high. Well, apparently there's a defect that I did not know about in one of the crock pots, or a specific, I shouldn't say crock pot, a pressure cooker, which is kind of shed some new light on the Boston Marathon bombing, perhaps. They have a tendency to explode. The lids explode. Folks, I'm telling you. And when that does happen, the pressure builds up, and because I even thought, well, maybe I wasn't supposed to clamp the lid down. Well, it's a manufacturer's defect. So not only did I not do well with that, I had a mess to clean up because this thing popped, and glass and everything went everywhere. So, guys, if you try to, like, I can't even say read the instructions, but I got to just say, guys, if you're out there trying to help your wife or help your family, you might want to know what you're doing a little bit. But anyway.
Hey, how long is Coast?
An hour.
How long is the show?
It's a 4-hour show.
Okay, because thanks, Billy, in the chat room. Send a link. It says that you're going to be on for the first half of the program.
Okay, well, I just talked to Stephanie. I talked to Stephanie today.
Guest host Richard Surrett.
That's it. Okay. Well, if it's 2 hours, it's 2 hours. It's good.
Well, it says on the first half of the program, you'll be joined by guest host Richard Surrett.
And you know what, ladies and gentlemen, if you think that we're sometimes discombobulated, not organized, even the biggest and the best have issues. And I'm not saying that's the case here or with them, but sometimes when you go into an interview, you just never know if they might say, hey, stay for a half hour, that might be an hour, or they might say stay for an hour, and that could be a half hour. So it's always kind of a surprise, and you have to be prepared for the unexpected. But getting back to the real meat of the program, now that we've gone through this, I just want to get back to the Establishment Clause and the Second Amendment and the First Amendment, and then I'm going to kick it back to you because this is important. We ended the last hour by talking about the Establishment Clause, about the First Amendment, and the two clauses to the First Amendment, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. Please understand, folks, the meaning and the intent of this amendment in both clauses, because it's this amendment that grants us as Americans in this country to freely and openly practice our faith. The First Amendment was adopted by the framers to promote and not prohibit the practice of our religious freedom. And you will find people argue this point. Well, when did everything go awry? Go back to the administration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It was after the Second World War when the Supreme Court began to just depart, derail from the Christian heritage of America. We were established as a Christian nation. You go back to the Mayflower Compact, the Pilgrims and the separatists that came over to this country. They came over to this country and established this as a Christian nation. Now, you will see that the secret societies and, of course, the various other aspects had infiltrated the Founding Fathers were not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly they penned a great document that lasted for many years until it was perverted by the courts. But the fact of the matter is we were established as a Christian nation. But it was during and after the time of Roosevelt that we looked at judicial activism to take apart our country, began in earnest to subvert the meaning and intent of our Constitution as it relates to freedom of religion. And in addition to this judicial activism, one of the most significant legislative moves to gag churches and church leaders from speaking out on issues of morality of faith and beliefs occurred, folks, in 1954. And guess by who? Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Was that the tax status?
Absolutely.
And I don't understand this. A lot of people bring this up, and we mention it quite a bit. Why are churches for some leeway on paying taxes or some exemption from paying taxes, giving into the government? I mean, is money really that important that you're willing to sell the church out? And I'm not saying this is the case for all 501c3s, but many of them use it and is an excuse not to be active about certain things.
Okay, I understand the basis
and I don't
of your
want
question.
to attack
I don't
church,
think,
but
right.
if you had the option to say, well, we'll pay the tax and we'll have our content not regulated from the government, or we'll join this tax-exempt status and go along with what the government says we can or can't do, I don't care if I'll be in the red every year. I'm not going along with the government.
That's right. And this is why we are paying heavily for not being a 501c3. The Hagmann and Hagmann Report is not a 501c3.
Yeah, taxes aren't cheap.
Well, no, not at all. And, well, anyway, but people have to understand the origins of how 501c3, how this came into effect. And there are many, many, many good books out there about this very topic, but it originated with Lyndon Baines Johnson. He's a Democrat from Texas, of course. You know him as JFK's vice president. Well, back in 1954, he was running for re-election. Now, where he was running for re-election in Texas, the race was really hotly contested. Johnson was facing aggressive opposition from politically conservative, anti-communist, non-profit Christian groups. Now, at the same time, what was going on then, that was kind of in the wake of, or just right after, the McCarthy hearings, when Senator Joseph McCarthy was actively involved in ferreting out communist infiltration within our government, which did exist. And if I can recommend a book for everyone, M. Evans is the author. The book is called Blacklisted by History. It is, I think, about 400 pages. I've got it on my bookshelf. I've read it a number of times. It really details the communist infiltration into our government. Now, this is only one part of the story. McCarthy was absolutely 100% right. You talk about Hollywood saying, well, I was blacklisted. Not so much anymore. But the Ed Asners of the world and those people saying, well, McCarthyism. And you hear McCarthy being used as a verb still today, McCarthyism. Or I shouldn't say verb, an adjective. You hear it used as a very in a derisive manner. Well, McCarthy was close to American industrialist H.L. Hunt. Now, he was the founder of a huge multi-billion-dollar oil business. Hunt also had his own radio program where he promoted conservative political views. And I'm talking about socially conservative views as well. Now, he was best known during the 1950s, the early 50s. In fact, I think it was from like 50 to 56. He funded his own foundation. It was called Facts Forum, the umbrella company that produced conservative radio and television programs. Now, using those media venues, Hunt broadcast news and commentary like we do, kind of like from a conservative, anti-communist nature. Concurrent with this broadcast initiative, his foundation distributed books and pamphlets and other material written by just a lot of conservative, socially, fiscally conservative political figures, including McCarthy, by the way. It was really partially due to this long reach of H.L. Hunt in his promotion of this conservative ideology, especially among Christian churches, that LBJ was politically on the ropes. So what did he do? He did the only thing he could do. He used this political clout. You remember Johnson, of course, if you studied history, what a bully Johnson was. He introduced an amendment that broadened in the reach of the IRS. It empowered the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, and allowed them into our nation's churches, prevented them from speaking out on political candidates, positions, and other related matters. It was the Johnson Amendment. Now, that was codified in 26 U.S.C. 501c3. There it is. It was passed unanimously. Not only was it passed unanimously back then, it was passed without debate. Hey, we're not going to talk about this. Johnson introduced it. They passed it. It was stamped. End of story. Now, if think about that against the backdrop about what we're seeing today. Have we not seen the IRS being used as a weapon to stifle and silence political opposition against the administration or the regime of Barack Hussein Obama? Yes, every single day. Lois Lerner. Well, I'm sorry, Senator. Or, I'm sorry, Senator. I invoking my Fifth Amendment right to avoid incriminating myself. Talk about contempt of Congress and contemptible behavior. This all stems back to LBJ. This all stems back to even go back further, FDR, judicial activism, and the empowerment of the IRS, which Barack Hussein Obama has now even breathed more life into the IRS and is now using the IRS as this special army. So at this point, and we also have to remember the IRS scandal, it wasn't a scandal. It's not a scandal. It's criminal. It's a crime. Why do you think Lois Lerner is invoking the Fifth? Because she's facing jail time. It's a crime for the IRS to delay the issuance, for example, of tax-exempt applications, especially for those groups who stand firmly in the Christian conservative, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment camps. Is it not? This is just one reason why. We all need to have a firm knowledge and understanding of history. So why it's so important. It provides us with the insight into the tactics of tyranny today. And since that time, judicial activism at the federal level has not only been reinforced, but it's also reinforced the so-called unconstitutional wall of separation, which doesn't exist. It's served to build it higher. It's through this judicial activism by federal courts and this tyranny at the federal level that is being used with surgical precision to excise Christianity from the freedoms granted to us by our Creator and enumerated by our founding fathers and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And you know what? We've got the ability to fight back, and we need to fight back. Congress can overturn any ruling by the Supreme Court by a simple majority at this point. Why aren't they doing that? Because we are a captured operation, because the very progressive communist New World Order dupes. I don't care if you're talking about John Boehner, Harry Reid. I don't care who it is. Let the big talkers out there indict everyone that's responsible for this, not just adhering to these false political paradigms. So what we're seeing today is this attack on churches, on you and I, on the people who are anti-gun grabbers. And they're using the IRS as this tool, as this marching army to prevent us from speaking out against the government. This is getting more and more serious, which ties into all of the events that you're seeing today, whether it is the gun registration, soon to be confiscation in Connecticut, to the, you just name it. Name the scandal or what they term scandals. It all comes back to the First and Second Amendments. And they need to get rid of the Second Amendment, because without the Second Amendment, the First Amendment will never exist. And this is a huge deal, folks. It really is. I do recommend Blacklisted by History. I do recommend any book, well, especially the book by Dr. John Coleman. I reference him often. What You Should Know About the United States Constitution and Bill of Rights. That was published back in 1999. These are some excellent references to enable you to to debate with authority on this fictitious wall of separation of church and state. We're seeing an attack like this police chief in down south. The wall. Everyone talks about this wall of separation. There is none.
And we have a couple other stories not pertaining to faith, but pertaining to the oppressive nature of our government cracking down on the regular law-abiding citizens in America. And I'll read off the three we have here. One, this out of CBS Baltimore. 81-year-old grandmother jailed for 2 days for a pet violation. An 81-year-old great-grandmother has been placed behind bars for a minor pet violation committed nearly a year ago. The woman, Hartford County woman, says she tried paying thousands of dollars in fines but couldn't afford them. Gigi Barnett explains the senior citizen says her punishment does not fit the crime. The crime is a small dog. So the 81-year-old widow spent 2 nights in the Hartford County jail because her pet somehow got loose in her front yard several times. This is one example. Number two, the EPA in Wyoming, $75,000 a day in fines for having a pond on the property. Andy Johnson and his family, all they wanted to do was build a stock pond in his sprawling 8-acre Wyoming farm. He and his wife, Katie, spent hours constructing it, filling it with crystal clear water, bringing in a brook and brown trout, ducks, and geese, and it was a place where horses could drink and gaze, and the private playground for his 3 children. But instead of enjoying the fruits of his labor, the Wyoming welder says he was basically bombarded by the federal government, struck with what he calls a petty power play by the EPA. He claims the agency is now threatening him with civil and criminal penalties, including a threat of a $75,000 a day fine, all for building a pond on his property under the new Clean Water Act. Building a dam or creek without a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers, says because he did this without his permit, he violated the Clean Water Act. Therefore, the EPA claims that the material from his pond is being discharged into other waterways. Therefore, he is in violation of the law, and they can take his property away. And last but not least, this was just another one of many stories similar to this. The Department of Homeland Security conducts an unannounced school lockdown drill, scaring children and teachers. DHS is expanding its operations by running unannounced school lockdown drills, another sign the encroachment of the DHS into more areas of American lives. On Thursday, March 6th, a team comprised of 10 officials from the DHS and Essex County Prosecutor's Office, the New Jersey Department of Education, Safety, and Security Task Force visited Glenridge High School to conduct an unannounced school lockdown drill, while the expectation of Glenridge Superintendent and Chief of Police and no Glenridge school personnel or student received any advance notice of the exercise. Now, I know the first 2 cases were different from the third.
Well, but the first 2 cases, let's just break this down. The first 2 cases, you might think, well, so what? But see, what's going on is this is happening with more and more frequency. And who are they going after? They're going after property owners. They're going after law-abiding citizens, making them felons, or making them they're bleeding us dry through these arbitrary regulations that under the auspices of the EPA and other government organizations. We've got to. This is an argument that politics is local, and we can fight at the local level, and we must fight at the local level.
Absolutely. And what we're seeing here with the EPA is one of many power grabs that is being conducted by the EPA under this Clean Water Act. All private tributaries, lakes, streams, ditches are now subject to the EPA's authority under this Clean Water Act. And yesterday we had a story we wanted to get into and didn't get a chance to. Obama's first public land bill in 5 years. Obama signed the first congressionally passed public land bill in 5 years Thursday and called on Congress to do more to protect the wilderness. It's now up to Congress to do more. There are currently dozens of conservative proposals before Congress, many supported by both Democrats and Republicans, to protect important lands across the country and help grow our economy, Obama said in a statement. The law officially expands the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore in Glen Arbor, Michigan, a move that will protect an additional 32,000 acres of Lake Michigan coastline. Comes after Obama added the Point Arena Storena public lands to Coastal California National Monument on Tuesday. Now, this might sound all good and dandy. At the same time, what they're not telling you is this is an environmental justice Agenda 21 initiative that is going to limit access of the public to more lands that are being quoted as being used for wildlife preserves. In this case, they're saying it is they call it the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. But these are power grabs. They are systematically, basically like a crime scene, enclosing off areas of wilderness of the United States to the public. And they're going to continue to do this. And it's going to be in your face. It's going to be in your home. The smart meters. You don't want to put in a smart meter that, can monitor your electricity and much, much more. You're not going to be allowed to use electricity. We went over the story last month of a woman who didn't need to be hooked up to the electric grid, didn't need to be hooked up to the water source of the city, but was forced to do so in face of a confiscation of her property just because she didn't need to be hooked up. She was self-sustainable without any city help, but because her house fell along county lines or something along those rules, she was forced to link her house up to the electric grid and the water grid. The encroachment of the administration's branch agencies, the EPA, the IRS, have increasingly been hostile, targeting American business owners, law-abiding businesses to regular tax-paying landowners, and it's only going to get worse. Your property, whether you owe money on your mortgage or you don't owe money on your mortgage and think you own your house outright, is only a rent. You're paying rent by your property tax. And we said it many times, stop paying your property tax. If you own your property outright, you stop paying your property tax, they will seize your land. There's been stories where people's whole house has been seized after being paid off for 30 years for a $200 plus property tax fine. These people aren't playing games. You live in their land, and now they are in what I suspect is for the accommodation of the foreign powers that own our debt, preserving what they consider to be their collateral on the debt, which is us and our land.
Precisely. And to expand on this, and I think it's important because what's behind this, the EPA, when we talk about this, when we talk about these situations, a woman facing prison and fines, I should say, for these little compliance issues or these compliance issues that have gone so far out of control. We're talking about the psychology of compliance here in a larger sense, because look back in history. Why did Nazi soldiers commit unspeakable atrocities just at the request of Hitler, for example? And why do many of us stand silently when we witness bullying? Isn't that kind of a in fact, for those TV people, I think the season or series finale of Seinfeld involved this so-called Good Samaritan law, and they made light of it. But think about that. Do not a lot of us stand by when people are getting bullied? And wouldn't you classify what we were just talking about with these people with the pond and the animal? And isn't this a form of governmental bullying? Well, what's the big story behind this? We have this tendency, and we've been groomed for this, to comply with authority, whether it's legitimate or not. And when in positions of authority, people are innately aggressive. Now, we should be thankful that we live in the United States, those listening to this in the U.S., that we don't have to confront these warlords face to face, at least not now, or not to the extent other countries do. But if you look at, for example, many groups in our society today, the police, the corrections officer, too often they abuse their authority. We see this on the YouTube videos with the police just going ballistic in some cases. Does that mean all police are bad? No. But what's the psychology behind it? The psychology of compliance, folks. I just want you to do your own research, and then you decide. Go back to 1961. Again, I think we can, all of our answers today can be found in history. In 1961, just very briefly, Professor Stanley Milgram, that's Milgram, Milgram, Professor Stanley Milgram. If you don't know about this, please get educated about this. He conducted an experiment at Yale University. Now, he took some people off the street and said, look, here's what we need you to do. We want you to administer shocks as punishments. Let me be more precise. It would be like saying, okay, we need some volunteers. And out of a group of friends or neighbors, the volunteers was obtained by Professor Milgram. They knew each other. They were friends. One of the friends was in one room, another in another room. One in, we'll say John Doe 1 was in a room with this machine. John Doe 2 was in a room by himself. They could not see each other. Now John Doe 1 was in the room with the machine. It was told to deliver intense shock punishment to John Doe 2, the friend or acquaintance in the other room, whenever he or she answered a question incorrectly. Now think about that. Think about that, youth. Imagine yourself today signing up for this process or signing up for this experiment where you're told by someone in uniform, okay, here's what we want you to do. We're going to ask your friend in the other room a question. If he gets it wrong, you're to administer a shock. Push this button and you shock the person. And if the questions are any more, if the questions are progressively worse or wrong, the shocks get greater and you have to push buttons and to keep pushing the button. The test subjects believed that they were actually causing another human being great harm, even though in reality they weren't. It was just a fake. Despite the fact that many subjects were visibly uncomfortable, I mean, they laughed nervously and they were just kind of, oof. With giving painful shocks to another human being, 26 out of 40 participants continued to push the button, shocking people up to what they believed was a 450-volt level. It was labeled XXX on the machine. Do you know that no subject stopped before giving an allegedly 300-volt shock, labeled intense shock, despite the fact that the Confederate friend in the next room was yelling and screaming in agony and stating, oh my gosh, I'm hurt, I'm hurting. Now, all of the subjects, again, as I stated, were voluntary participants. When one participant expressed an unwillingness to administer the next shock, the experimenters prodded him, and they said, look, please continue. Or the experiment requires that you continue. They used this authority to ingratiate this psychology of compliance. A decade later, researchers conducting the Stanford prison experiment randomly assigned participants to either guard prisons or prisoners in this in a very intricate role play session, the instruction to maintain order in a simulated prison environment. The guards began harassing and intimidating prisoners. Now, the prisoners did attempt to rebel, but they always returned to compliance very quickly after the outburst or an outburst, despite the fact that they were volunteers. Now, even in the light of the extreme aggression of guards, the experiment was terminated after only 5 days. They originally intended the experiment to last 2 weeks, but the psychology of compliance, it was clear that the volunteers would comply, whether it was the 1961 Milgram experiment or the experiment a decade later in the Stanford prison experiment. And you can search these out, folks. You can go to the library even and look these up, and you'll see. This is the compliance of, or the psychology of compliance. And you think for one moment a SWAT member or a SWAT team is not going to go to some Connecticut house in the suburbs because they believe that the person didn't register the magazine or firearm as required by law? Even a SWAT team member who believes a raid is unconstitutional will likely not defy orders from his superior because compliance was engendered into him or her during the training process. And you've got to understand the training that these police officers undergo, and particularly the SWAT raid teams undergo. And this is going on and on and on at the farm, at the CIA, within the FBI, within local and municipal and state law enforcement agencies. This is indeed the psychology of compliance. And folks, you wonder, and people wonder, well, geez, do you think that the police will go along with this, even though it means breaching the Constitution? The majority will, according to history. And I just gave you two instances in history where they will, in fact, do so. And that's why the lady with the animal, or the person with the pond, or the person with the farm in the front yard, the crops in the garden in the front yard, whatever it might be.
In the front yard,
exactly. It's this psychology, this abhorrent psychology of compliance that we're facing. And I think that people talk about these issues, but they don't talk about what's behind it, the human factor behind it, and the historical the historical understanding, or the historical examples that I just cited right there. It has not changed. It's only gotten worse because of this indoctrination which is taking place. So hopefully that gives you an idea. Look, we just don't need to, or we just should not battle or even belittle the enemies within the country. We need to search for the truth. We need to pull together, and we need to pull together and understand with precision what's going on. We don't need to sit back and watch the demise of our free nation, or whatever is left, whatever semblance of freedom we have left. We need to seek out the truth, God's truth, the truth. And you know what? We need to take action, because by taking action, it's only by taking action will it keep us free.
But you mean we have to read for ourselves? We have to think for ourselves?
You got to think for yourself.
That's a lot of it. That's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work, right?
I mean, with all the American Idol and Dancing with the Stars to keep up with, we got our kids' soccer. We got to worry about putting food on the table. We don't have time to read the Bible. We don't have time to seek out what the Lord's will for us is. We're a busy people. But one thing, what is it? Audible.com. Audiobooks on the
nice segue. Nice segue. Yeah.
You can get the Bible, and anybody who has a smartphone, you can get a Bible app that will speak the Bible to you.
That's right.
For free.
Yeah. In fact, if you go to our website, HomelandSecurityUS.com, and I'll begin to populate this website back up again with reports. I have been doing research and reports, or compiling reports and doing research during this incredible period of time in the last several days or the last couple of weeks, but I just haven't polished things up to publish it. But go to our website, HomelandSecurityUS.com, click on the link to Audible.com and download the free audio book. And hey, the Bible's there. 1 second after it's there. Other books. If you can, no time? There you go. Thanks for that. And by the way, do it through our website, because that helps us stay on the air and pay the bills.
Absolutely. Some updated information on the Malaysian flight that has 370 that has been missing for now over a week. The latest reports from Reuters say radar data suggests missing Malaysian plane deliberately flown away off course. Sources. Military radar data suggests the Malaysian Airlines jetliner, missing for nearly a week, was deliberately flown hundreds of miles off course, heightening suspicions of foul play among investigators, sources told Reuters on Friday. But this article goes into something that is pretty strange. It talks about from the point of privacy, for privacy, that this plane was diverted or this plane was led away.
You're going to see, and I know, ladies and gentlemen, everyone loves a good mystery, and everyone that talking about psychology. Everyone loves a great mystery. This mystery has all the components of being a great mystery that we can all have front row seats to. But we're not getting the truth. I just, on my way here...
Act of privacy, they say.
Act of privacy. Well, on my way here, see, that came up in a... where is that? There was a television on, and it had the corporate mainstream news. I think it was NBC, or it was one of either NBC, CBS, or ABC. It was the nightly news. And there was a segment in there, a couple of minute segment, that stopped me in my tracks. I had to listen to this when I was on my way in. They were talking about this Malaysian flight disappearance, or this aircraft disappearance, and all the conspiracy theories that were spawned from this disappearance. And what, as I was watching this, what struck me is all of the effort, all of the mental gymnastics by people out there. This has engaged the world. Where is this flight? And it's a valid question, legitimate question. I think one that deserves an answer. And I do believe that this aircraft, there's mischief with respect to this aircraft in terms of, I think at the level of the air traffic controllers, and I think at the level of the nation-state level. And I do believe that the intent was, well, let me back up, Joe, and you and I talked about this. I believe, and just double check with you, do you believe that our government knows exactly where this plane is?
Some elements in our government, I believe, 100% know exactly where the plane is.
And folks, I think you would agree with that. I think most listeners would agree with that as well.
If the plane crashed, we would have seen wreckage by now. And talking with Augusto Perez before the show today, we were saying how even if they wanted it to seem as a wreckage, they could have taken a empty plane and crashed it in the, via remote control to make it appear as though it were the same wreckage. But yeah, do we need answers? Do the 239 family members of the passengers on this plane need answers? Do they have answers?
That's the other part of it too. What is it doing to those families? I mean, I think what we went through this week, personally, what I went through and what my family went through, it was bad stuff. But even worse is not knowing. When you don't know, boy, I'll tell you, that is exponentially worse than knowing, I believe, because, think about that. Put yourself in the position of a family member of one of those aboard that aircraft. But this does. Folks, I do believe, as others in the intelligence community have talked to others, I do believe we will find that aircraft will reappear, but in a very dangerous way. That's just my view. I think that's
very possible and very scary scenario. And that begs the question: which country colors, will it be representing when it does reappear? We're up against the break. One more quick headline here: Russia says it intercepted a U.S. drone over Crimea and shot it down.
What a surprise, right?
And the Army says the drone fell. Oh, I see this. There's a DDoS attack on Blog Talk Radio, and the attack has been bypassed, and Blog Talk Radio is now stable. We didn't experience any cutting out or any problems, so hopefully there's no issues.
Really, they're just script kiddies in their mama's basement doing this, right?
Well, just a couple of thoughts, and by the way, one thing that I'd heard Joe mention it previously, I do get the whole thing about the property taxes, and it's these excessive property taxes that are for a lot of really just malarkey, if you want to get right down to it. But we don't want chaos. We don't want no government. We want community, and we want the roads functional. We want rural power. We need things taken care of. We want stop signs at the intersections and lights that work. We want a police force. We want judges and courts. Those are the things that make for a society in which we can function and live. So it's not that there's not valid reasons why we as citizens agree to taxes to sustain all of those services in order to have society. And certainly the taxes in city areas are higher as a general rule because you require more order, there's more density, and things have to work precisely on time. The trucks have to be able to come and go with precision, the trains, the planes. And, while we do have other types of taxes that pay for those things, we pay for taxes on our airplane tickets. We, pay for security and for airport landing fees, and we pay taxes on all of our gas and oil, and it just goes on and on. In fact, one of the interesting things that just has stuck with me over the years was one of the guys, and I can't think of his name right off the top of my head now, had done some research on the taxes, and he decided that in the United States, he had identified 90,000 different entities that had taxing authority. Water districts, utility districts, the FET taxes on your tires for your car, marine taxes, pollution taxes. It just goes on and on and on. 90,000 different entities, not 90,000 different taxes, 90,000 different entities with legal authority to lay a tax on an item, an action, something related to you. Now, that's just over the top. That's out of control. And, how do we get that back under control? But, even more critical, part of the problem for our country and where our country really did start to go astray is when you look at how the country was laid out initially, power resided with the states for matters internal as to the function of the citizens within that state. And the federal government's primary role was to act as a coordinator for transactions between the states, traffic between the states. We have an interstate highway system, and there's a standardization of a lot of the laws so that there can be conduct from one state to another without, having to have passports to go to every state, for example, or something else, and also for presentation outside the country. It's, the most basic function of government is for a police force to protect us within our country from lawlessness or those who would be lawless, and a military from those outside our country who would attack us to take what we have, to steal from us, to enslave us. And so police and the military, that's the most basic items with the government, and then just a reasonable ability to function. So we have streets that work a certain way and headlights on cars of a certain, intensity, and stop signs and things like that. Good fences make good neighbors type of thing. So that, we all work together and have the ability to have society. But what happened at the turn of the last century, just shortly thereafter, was this new law, if you will, allowing for an income tax. And that income tax was passed nearly simultaneously with the creation of the Federal Reserve. And those two items do go hand in hand. A lot of people get all upset about the Federal Reserve, and they don't understand that the income tax is the other shoe. And the one really does need the other in order to function. And part of that is that with the income tax, the autonomy of the states was severely damaged over time because it created a centralization of our economy, something you and I have talked about previously. Most everything that you can find that's going wrong in the country today, I would make the case that almost every single major item can be tracked back to the Treasury, to either the Federal Reserve or the tax system with this federal income tax. And with the centralization of our economy, everything flowing to one place. Think of it prior to this federal income tax. If you were corrupt, if you had a Tammany Hall like they had in New York, or if you had corruption out of Chicago like existed for a very long time in these large cities out in the South and other places, when you had that corruption, was corruption that was really mostly at the local level. And it was very hard for it to, spread easily to the highest offices. And the reason was because the money wasn't at the highest offices, it was out at the local level. And if you were going to be corrupt, you didn't just have to corrupt one person. You could do the governor or something like that, but you had to do a whole bunch of people. And if you were thinking politicians, if you had to buy them off to get votes, if you had to get people to do stuff, you had to get to a lot of people in order to turn something. But, technically about 50,000 people if you get right down to it. But now, the way the system is set up now, you only have to be able to get not all of Congress or all of the Senate. You just need to get a significant portion and be able to pay them off, buy them off, move them whatever way you want them to go. And that's what happened during the creation of the Federal Reserve and the income tax. They waited till a holiday. They had enough people that were, just fence-ridden and owed people stuff, and then they were able to sway just that handful of people. Look at what happened with healthcare. How at the end, they had enough people to get it to a certain point, and then they just had to really pay off, buy off, whatever they had to take it over the top. You remember the dramas of those handful of people that finally did the vote and what they got for their vote. At the end of the day, whatever way you want to say it, a few dozen, a few hundred, if you want to say Congress too, the representatives too. Okay, well, a few hundred is a lot different than tens of thousands. Why? Because the money wasn't at the state level, and the action wasn't at the state level. The action was at the federal level because they had centralized the economy and the decision and the powers in that. So when we think about what's gone wrong with the country and that so much of what's gone, this decision-making has been centralized, what has made it centralized, what has placed the power in so few hands is the income tax and the Federal Reserve, the ability to go to the window and just get any amount of money you want for the latest project and spread the payments out over time, and then to raise a tax, change a tax in a heartbeat, and lay it on the people, and get more money. Just a handful of people making that decision at the federal level, and you have very little effect because they're so far from home. It's not the guy that lives in the same city as you that you see, frequently down at the restaurant in the morning, and that has a lot of contact with people and feels the pain themselves very precisely, specifically, close to you. And so, and the numbers become so big, it's just huge numbers. So, from a corruption standpoint, even if you're just saying lobbyists and people, we're trying to help you from an industry thing, the lobbyists don't have to lobby 50,000 people. The lobbyists have to lobby, a handful of people that can swing the vote. And so this centralization is a real problem for us. But then we have to look further, and we say, was the Federal Reserve, the creation of the Federal Reserve, was that constitutional? There were good men that had serious misgivings with the wisdom of a Federal Reserve because of things that happened in the 1800s when there was attempts to create a U.S. bank and all sorts of mischief that occurred related to that several times. And, of course, Mr. Astor was leading the charge to hold back the creation of the Federal Reserve and have been very outspoken. And, of course, what was his fate? He was one of the men who ended up going down with the Titanic. Those men that were holding that this was not wise, this wasn't American or in the best interest of the American people. Then from the income tax side, an interesting point, and my friend Irwin Schiff was really the first person to point this out and to raise it definitively. Now, there had been court cases where other people had come in and raised the question and fought, and the Supreme Court had given these tangled, bizarre, decisions that are convoluted on purpose, so that, how many angels dance on the head of a pin type of answers, and it depends on, how big their feet are and their shoe size and, things like that, and whether they have ballet experience, or some stupid thing like that. The reality is Irwin Schiff made this incredible argument. First of all, he said, there is no law requiring you to pay an income tax. And one of the things that was lost even on a lot of people that follow Irwin, his original findings were based on the 1954 change in the income tax laws, which you spoke about just a few minutes ago. And in 54, things that were included in the disclosure statements that everybody heard about and everything else from the IRS were just dropped. They didn't change the law. They just stopped, including them in their disclosure statements or in their conversation. They didn't change the law. They didn't change the wording. They just deleted some stuff from what's said. They didn't say that it's not legal anymore, that we're required to do whatever. They just dropped some points in there. And so 54 was where things really started to get some momentum. And I might add, with Johnson, I think history has shown that there was corruption there, that he was part of a gang of very corrupt people that were being bought off to go certain directions. So there was a certain momentum that existed with Johnson and the crowd around him. And what was important to that crowd was to keep the income tax going and making it stronger. And I might add, there was a very important thing which virtually is not talked about, known, or understood today, which was huge in the conversations from 47 on till the law, Congress took the action it did in 54, and was the reason why Congress was being badgered about the law, and that was during the war, during the Second World War, withholding taxes was started on people's paychecks. It wasn't a lot, but it was done because they needed the money right away. They couldn't wait till the end of the year, and it was to make it easier on the citizens so that they didn't have to come up with the money all in one big lump sum so they wouldn't have a problem. And so employers began withholding their taxes and paying them into the government to support the war effort during the war. Now, when the war was over, a lot of citizens said, okay, so I don't have to pay the withholding tax anymore. And by the way, how do I know the taxes are exactly what I have? Because my situation might be different, and we get these exemptions, et cetera. So I just want to pay my tax, once a year like I'm supposed to. And I don't want my money withheld every week from my paycheck. And there was this battle going on, and the people were, waging quite a battle. Well, the government didn't want that because they knew that if they didn't get that money every week from the employers, withholding the money on behalf of the employees, the average worker, that the likelihood, number one, that they wouldn't get it was high, and number two, that people would begin to literally revolt when they had to pay that tax in one big lump sum, once a year, that they decided that they had to address this. So with the subterfuge of, looking at the law and modifying the law and everything, they had to find other things to distract people with, such as the charitable organizations and whether that tax, whether they were tax exempt or not, and deciding that if they met all the right criteria, they could be tax exempt. Well, that ruse, that distraction, was very artful. And it goes to the other part of your conversation you had a few minutes ago, which is the psychology. These people, like a magician, can deftly move a hand, create a poof of smoke, send the dancing girl by, whatever they need. As soon as you get close to looking where the real magic sleight of hand is occurring. Their artful deception will throw you off, and that's the psychology of their magic act, knowing how audiences behave, knowing how people react. So they'll find a live wire thing, a la, our most recent thing with the healthcare coverage. Well, is contraception or abortion covered? Is that going to be okay? And all of a sudden, the conversation isn't whether the law is lawful at all or not, but whether some little aspect of it is going to be included or is appropriate or not. And you can get everybody wound up and off on a red herring, wild goose chase, and the rest of the thing goes forward just as they'd planned. And so when you look at the income tax law in 54, and this was what got Irwin going. After this was passed, and he looked at it and he thought about it. He was actually owned an insurance company at the time, and he was a very successful businessman. He had done very well, and he was looking at some of this stuff, and somebody pointed stuff out to him, and he was he understood reading the fine print in policies, in insurance policies, and how they're written. And he began comparing the fine print in the tax laws and looking at it and going, well, wait a minute. In the testimony of the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service in 1954, before Congress, the Commissioner said very precisely to a direct question, are the income tax laws the same as the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms laws that are also enforced by federal agencies, by ATF. And part of the question was, why do we need a separate enforcement agency when we already have ATF to enforce these collection laws? Shouldn't we just be expanding the ATF to enforce the income tax laws? I mean, doesn't it make sense? Why would you have a highway patrol and a state patrol? Don't they do the same thing?
This blew my mind when you were telling me about this. And folks, please listen to this. This really cuts to the heart of the matter.
So, at the ATF level, the commissioner of the IRS said the two laws, the income tax laws and the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms laws, could not be more different. The commissioner of the IRS said ATF laws, Title 26 laws, are mandatory. Everybody that falls under ATF laws and regulations in the Federal Registry must pay the taxes according to the statute. However, the income tax laws are voluntarily collected and enforced. And could not be done by ATF agents. Why? Because it's voluntary. Well, wait a second. There were people that fought cases all the way back in the 30s, fighting and going all the way to the Supreme Court saying, if the tax is voluntary, I volunteer not to. If the reporting is voluntary, I volunteer not to. And the cases were, the findings are really pretty bizarre, and you have to understand it's kind of, it was wordsmithing, and you had by design it was intended to be deceptive in the way they answered it, and yes meant no and no meant yes because it was in response to a question phrased a certain way type of thing. And so at the end of the day, it didn't change the law, which was that was voluntarily reporting of your taxes and payment of your taxes. Now, in Black's Book of Law, there's definitions of mandatory versus shall, for example. And shall is one of those words that's used in the IRS code fairly frequently. And in Black's Law Dictionary, it says shall means may. It's different than mandatory. And you wouldn't be required to do something that said shall, for example. And so what happened was, though, well, if you think about it, and this is a really fine point, and I remember when Earl and I were sitting and talking about this, and he hadn't actually completely got this exactly himself, I don't think, and we were having dinner at the top of the world in Las Vegas on his birthday. And I said, but with the tax laws, if you look at the way that it's written, the way that they're getting people is because once you sign your name that, you have gone through your taxes, understood what your taxes are, and self-assessed, you have determined that you owe a certain amount. You sign it, you send it in, and now you're under oath. I owe this much in taxes. But that, and Irwin had gotten all of that. But the part that he hadn't quite completely gotten, that the way I was saying it was, but the law itself is not a violation of the Constitution. Why? Because if it said you must pay income taxes, then the law itself would be a violation of the Constitution. But the law is said to be voluntary reporting, voluntary assessment. So once you volunteer, you waive your rights, and now it's, you voluntarily waived your rights as soon as you send it in. Which he understood it at certain level, but he understood it from a that it was mandatorily enforced, that the law was wrong. No, the law isn't wrong. The enforcement of the law is wrong. It's a very fine difference. Where the problem is that it's not a law. So why is it being enforced? The law is not the problem. The enforcement of the law is the problem because it's not a law. They're enforcing stuff that's not a law. Who's enforcing, who's doing this work when they have no legal authority to do it? It's the enforcement of the collection of the taxes that is the violation of our constitutional rights. Those persons, those groups under color of authority, something you just spoke about, this group think, because somebody in authority said you got to go collect the tax. See, one of the agents that had been head of the enforcement division in California, and I can't think of his name right now. He's got a website and has done some great work. He was actually in charge of the criminal, assessing and going after, tax criminals, if you will, in the Northern California area. And somebody had made the case and had fought through. It was a gal that had been fighting the IRS for some time, and this agent decided he was going to find out what she was talking about and try to convince her, because she seemed sincere enough and she just didn't understand what she was talking about. So he starts going through the laws and he's looking at it, he's trying to figure it out, and he's trying to show her where she's wrong, and he's asking the supervisors questions, and before you know it, he's completely flipped around and decided, yeah, you're right. Laws are unenforceable. I'm violating the law. Everybody in my office is violating the law because they're enforcing a law that doesn't exist. Enforcing people to comply and obey laws that aren't laws. And this is the case. We have a bunch of people that are involved in groupthink, and it's the momentum of other people saying it's okay, and some authority says, well, we got to collect this and go do it, and okay, and they just go do it without even questioning the legitimacy of the authority that they or the people around them have to do anything. And if you look, for example, at all of these IRS enforcement agents, and you look at the IRS manual that they are supposed to be enforcing it by, they're allowed to enforce revenue laws against foreigners and non-citizens, or against government employees in the District of Columbia, but not against the rest of the citizenry in the rest of the states in the country. But they go out and enforce these things against citizens, forgetting that their authority only goes to foreigners and is limited to the District of Columbia. And so they are doing stuff that they're not authorized to do constitutionally or legally. They're extrajudicial in their actions. But nobody's stopping them. The courts, won't slow them down or anything. And now these people are being legitimized with this health care collection and enforcement of these revenues.
And there it is. Yep.
So,
yep.
And the reality is that there have been groups who have been very close to getting hearings. You know, there was a hearing scheduled for October 2001, and of course 9/11 stopped those hearings. And those hearings were going to be the big one, the one where they were finally going to get answers from the IRS about whether or not what they were doing was constitutional and was right. And it was going to be a big deal, and everybody was banking on it. And all of a sudden 9/11 happened, those hearings didn't happen. And, of course, instead we got Homeland Security, which is another question. Is Homeland Security a lawful organization? Is it legally, lawfully created? And there's some pretty good people that are, I think that they make very good cases that that is not a lawful federal agency. So our politicians don't want to, go after this stuff. The judges don't want to go after some of the stuff. Why? Because they're afraid they'll get taken after by the IRS. What just happened? The IRS was used in order to bully citizens. Now, that's the kind of thing that you would get in Daley's Chicago. That's the kind of thing you were getting in Texas with Johnson when he was in office down there in Texas, and that was the contention of a lot of people in Texas at the time, that he was a lawless politician. And so now, if you think about it, the fact that nobody could get the IRS under control, could get them to be answerable for what they were doing, all of a sudden it has reached this point where they're too big to stop. It's like living in gangland Chicago, or gangland New Jersey, in the worst of the times, with Capone around or something. And the corruption is so rife that you can't get an honest day in court, no matter what you do, because everybody's been bought off. And that it's horrible to say, even with the politicians, that they're all bought off, but a lot of them don't even understand how they've been bought off. They've been bought off artfully to where they have essentially, even themselves, bought into the illusion that these things are lawful and correct, and they're not. They just have some momentum, and nobody's going to argue it. And as soon as anybody raises the conversation where they're saying, but it's not fair, I'm going to protest or whatever, they're vilified because you're not doing your civic duty. You're trying to get out of it and put all the weight on the rest of us. You need to go to jail because you're not carrying your weight. And the reality is, a guy like Irwin, who I personally believe, and I hope your listeners are listening to me on this, my friend, Irwin Schiff, is the greatest political prisoner in America today. America has allowed this man in his 80s to go to jail. They want him to stay there for life because he is so dangerous, because he made the case, an excellent case. Is there even a law collection of income taxes, let alone is it being enforced correctly, et cetera, and is it a violation of the Constitution? It's not a violation of the Constitution because it's voluntary. It's unconstitutionally enforced in violation of federal law. Yet he's gone to prison. And you know what? As a man of conscience, he wouldn't back down. He was offered, if he'd just say he was crazy, they'd let him off. They wouldn't even let him out to his own family now. His health is deteriorating pretty quickly now. They wouldn't even let him out to his family for health reasons because he's so dangerous and he might cause sedition in the country. Do you know that in his court case in Las Vegas, the judge said he would not allow the Constitution to be brought up in his court? The judge had the audacity to say that in his court, he's the law, not the Constitution. For yourself and find out that I'm not at all wrong on this.
How is that possible? Was that the IRS or was that a special type of court, or was that just pure federal court?
No, he was tried in federal court. It was a complete fraud. They scammed. They had people that had some problems with the IRS themselves, and they scammed them into going in and trying to get Irwin to help them with their taxes. And the whole point was that Irwin didn't fill out people's tax returns. He would advise them on what the law said, and then they could make a decision for themselves, voluntary assessment. And they claimed that Irwin made out their tax returns for them, and there's all sorts of mischief that went on there, and including the way that they took his records, etc. I think it was, and they had ex parte meetings with the judge. The IRS people would show up an hour and a half before court, go and meet with the judge privately to coach him on what they wanted him to say, no doubt, or how they wanted him to rule, etc. Completely lawless in the way they functioned, and railroaded this through. Irwin has raised numerous incredible, excellent points. I mean, the guy's got a mind that's just as sharp as can be. And the Wall Street Journal wanted him to be their tax writer based on one of his books that he did back in the 70s. And said he was one of the greatest living, tax law professionals in the country, and really understood the core of the law. So, it's not like this is just some riffraff guy or anything. He really did understand it, but he was a real threat. And so they had to take him out because he was saying, nobody has to pay income taxes. You can just file zero. How much taxes you owe? Zero. And self-assessed at zero. At one point, the government said, well, zero isn't a number, and he had to go to court and prove that zero is a number, zero meaning nothing, nada, as opposed to something. He had to go prove that zero was a number. And then the judge at one point outlawed his book, and so his book was banned.
My goodness.
His book, Federal Mafia. People don't know this history. Why? Because anybody that covers it, if you go on the internet, you go whatever, as soon as you look there, these subversive agents, usually working for government or some entity related to it, come in and try to throw in monkey wrenches and misunderstanding and contention. And I would also say that for all of the people listening here, the things that we see, whether it be in message boards or blogs or the attacks against the show like yours, Doug, those things were all happening to Irwin back in the 80s and 90s. And that was where the attacks started, these coordinated attacks. Why? Because the greatest threat to the system was a guy like Irwin, and his only question was, is what you're doing legal? And that should still be our question right now, is what is going on in Washington right now legal? With the president deciding, well, I'm not going to do this. I don't care what Congress wrote for law. I'm going to decide that we're not doing that law. What in the world are you talking about? That's not the executive office's choice. The executive doesn't have that authority. Where is our Congress in not yarding this person in and getting him under control. That just goes to show you that they're all captured. And again, that's because our economy has been centralized. Our politics became centralized with the economy being centralized, with the money being centralized. Because right now, you can't build a sidewalk in Arizona without checking to make sure it's not a salmon spawning stream. You can't, ride your bicycle down the street practically without, being some federal helmet law being enforced. It's gotten crazy. The schools are dependent on federal matching funds for everything they do, and then the federal matching funds order them to do, all sorts of things in the process of the education that, with birth control and abortion, training, education training and stuff like that. And, it just goes on. And so the federal mandates with the federal money have centralized decision-making to the federal level. And it all goes back to this income tax law centralizing our economy, sucking, what was 25% of our economy to Washington, and now with the health care law, probably more like 40% of the economy to Washington, just from the income side, let alone all the other 90,000 different taxing entities with all the miscellaneous taxes over the top. So if you want to say what's the problem with the country and what's the solution, well, it's the taxes. The only reason Washington is exercising all this control over you and making all those decisions about your gun stuff and everything else, that's because they got the money. Look at what the response is, where those states have said, well, we're not going to obey your federal gun laws. They decided that they would only allow guns to be sold that were manufactured in their state. No interstate transactions involving the guns, only in-state manufacturers, and then they tell the Fed where to stick it. So what do you got to do? And I would propose to you that as the dollar goes through what's about to come, that the states are going to exercise more authority. And the only question is going to be, when are the states, Texas, could even be a California, unlikely, but I think Texas is not that unlikely. They might very well tell their citizens, don't pay any federal income tax this year. Starting today, stop paying withholding, all you employers, because we are out of here. And 4 or 5 other states decide to go with them. And the country balkanize and go different directions. Why? Because the dollar from the Fed isn't even working right anyway. Why send them any more money? They're not doing anything to help us. Doesn't mean that's what's going to happen, but I think there may be some rabble-rousing in that kind of a direction, and that's why the Feds would come in and start to exercise more federal authority to keep the states from going through that, or anybody that starts to talk that way or behave that way. So, but the taxes are key. And at the end of the day, I mean, in this 30 days before tax day, I would hope every single day while you're filling out your taxes, getting all your forms together and everything else, you remember there's a guy who went out and led the way to let you know that there is no law requiring you to file a federal tax return or to pay taxes. And he never lost his cases, just like the birth certificate, never got a day in court. He never actually got a day in court on that. He never got a day in court on the law. He always was some other bizarre side thing. He's in jail under a death sentence. Did I lose the guy?
We lost power here, and we're back up and running, back connected. So you really filled in nicely for us. Didn't even know we were gone, and kept talking while we were out of there. So we are back up now, though.
Oh, good. Well, again, I just think that it's important that people understand that there are great warriors out there. They're not all the fights that we hear about every day, but at the core, at the base, at the trunk of the tree, how is it they're wielding all their authorities over us, and what are they using against us? What gives them the power to control the states? It's the centralization through income taxes of the economy. And now with the healthcare tax, it's all over. It's all over. If that is allowed to stand. So
it's amazing to me, Aaron Russo did a great job on these subjects with the income tax on freedom to fascism, and sat down with one of the heads of the IRS and really got him in a hot seat and got him twisting his own words, talking about this voluntary compliance and how the word income, how important that was.
Well, and again,
it's just still undefined.
Well, I hear you. So, maybe our listeners here are seeing if there's issues in the studio. The mincing of the words, whether it be income or profit, etc., that was one of the key things that was done in one of the early court cases with the IRS. There was an understanding that income is a word that the definition, how can you have a gain when you spend your life blood, your life essence, to go out and work for something? You're trading something for something. The money you get when you spend your toil to make money is not an income to you, it's a trade. And in fact, there was court findings saying your labors could not be, money that you received for your labors could not be construed as income for taxable purposes. So there's plenty of court cases, but my contention, and this is what I was saying with Irwin, the law says it's a voluntary assessment. You voluntarily examine the tax code, examine all the taxes in the tax code, and then you voluntarily decide how much you owe in taxes, and then you sign your tax return on the bottom, I owe this much, under penalty of perjury. At the point that you sign that, you've signed your rights away. You now have said, I owe something, and they have a legal contract with you. You've made a legal contract with them that you owe this much money. And you've agreed to their laws, and you've agreed to allow them to come collect the money from you if you don't do it voluntarily, now that you've signed your thing saying, I've self-assessed and I owe this much. They're taking you at your word. And so, again, but the taxes, the tax code, they're totally lawful to the extent that they are written as voluntary payment of income tax. They're totally unlawfully enforced. And
what's the answer? I mean, as we're getting about 4.5 minutes to the end of the program, is there any way to fight and prevail?
Well, again, see, that's what I'm saying. I'm tying it to even the healthcare law. I'm tying it to Homeland Security. When people try to get their legislators, their senators, to look at what's been done in those types of the creation of those entities and the way that money is allocated to those entities, they don't even get the time of day, because this has this color of authority, this weight of momentum, and because of this group think, well, an official says we got to do it, well, then we better do it. It goes to the psychology that you were talking about a few minutes ago, that we've been programmed to believe that the guy with the badge, the guy in the politician's office, the guy at the prosecutor's office, the judge, are absolutely right. And even to the point where you can't get other judges or politicians to turn around and forcefully come in and say, what all the other words I can think of, are you talking about, Mr. Judge there in Las Vegas, saying you will not have the Constitution brought up in your courtroom? And remember, and you, by the way, you asked me this a minute ago, Doug, about which kind of a court was it. Remember, the IRS has tax court. Well, where's that in the Federal Registry? Where's that as a constitutional court? It's not. It's an administrative court. It's a creation of the Internal Revenue Service, and the judges are just administrators. They're arbitrators. They put on a robe. They act all official. It's a cloak. It's a disguise. They don't have any constitutional authority. And in fact, when you go into court in a tax court and you try to raise matter of constitution, they say, we don't listen to matters of constitution in this court. They won't tell you why, but the reason is because they're not a constitutional court. And when you signed your tax return, well, I'm almost done. When you signed your tax return, you signed that you owed something, and it was a contract with that private agency. And so you waived your constitutional rights and restrictions. When you went in their court, you waived your constitutional protections because you agreed to go into their court, in the tax court, as opposed to a federal court. And what happened with the judge in Irwin is that the federal judge was confusing tax court law with federal law, saying he wasn't going to have a constitution in his court, just like a tax court was, but he wasn't a tax court. He was a federal court.